Recording now.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay. Validation. Yes, guys. So, as you know, we got loads of forms, loads of endpoints that we are dealing with at the moment. I thought it's going to be a beneficial session to talk about validation and authentication. So when I say validation, it means validating a form if it has got the correct type of inputs. When I say authentication, that means that if I've got right to access certain pages. And also there is another word, authorization, that comes up. Authorization versus authentication. Let's do that. So yeah, as you can see here, authentication is the process of verifying someone who is, so if they've got the valid token, whereas authorization is the process of verifying what specific applications, files, and data that the user can access to.
Another way of thinking about this is authentication is that user has an account, right? They have an account so they can log in. That's authentication. As authorization is checking whether that user has access to a particular data or resource or file.
Exactly, yeah. Shall we start from API side and then move on to the front end, how we manage it in front end with the JWT tokens?
Shall we use the productive machines API as a
Yeah.
sample?
Yeah, that sounds great. So there you go. So let's start from the beginning. So if we go to roots in any project, this is in the API side. So I don't know if Person is there. Person, are you there? I think you are doing this part of the course now as well.
Not sure. Kind of there, yes.
Yeah, almost there. So you guys seen the Express.js library where you can just use the router function and do like put get requests.
Yep.
And you can define what the path is going to be, and then you define the controller where, let's say, if you use login in the controller, you will see all your Express calls, request, response. So if I go here, for example, so yeah, you just fetch the data, blah blah. You do the await. So I'll get back into this, in another session. But yeah, it's quite straightforward. But today's subject is mostly going to be in this roots section. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions if you think you don't know more about. Okay, so there are 3 types of authentication methods in here: authentication and authorization. So we use middlewares, a concept called middlewares. Middleware in any API. If I just quickly Google search what a middleware is. So I think that's a good photo there.
Yeah, that one is better.
That one, right? So when you got a request and response, the middleware is the section where it sits in the middle, does certain kinds of checks, or does certain kinds of functions, apply certain kind of functions. If it's a common function, for example, let's say authentication is common, right? It needs to authenticate every endpoint in the same way. That's why we call it's a middleware, basically.
Exactly, and the main idea is that a middleware both has access to the request object and also the response as well. So if you go back to the diagram, Kamal, and pay attention, the request coming in can be modified by the middleware. Then it goes into the controller function, then on the other end, when it's exiting your API, middleware can also change the response. Okay.
It sits in the middle. So our authentication layer also needs to sit in the middle, right? When I say middle, what I mean, so let's take one of these examples. For example, user
get session by ID maybe, or get
sessions maybe. Yeah, this one, for example. Okay. So initially, you guys probably have seen this before. This is what we do in a usual router get function, right? We got our URL and then the function for the controller. This is like the most basic way. If you would like to add a middleware, like its name, you can add it in the middle of these two. So in here, right? In the middle. So you can call any function in the middle and it will be your middleware then. That's why they call it middleware, because it sits in between. Our authentication layer is gonna go here, I said. So just gonna do a back. Yeah, let's look at the authentication in the middle, right? So this one. So this authentication keyword, if you look at it where it's importing from a folder called middleware authentication. So if you go, where is it? Middlewares authentication, you will see this little controller where what it does is it's basically generates a JWT token on the back of things, and it attaches it in your request header.
That's not exactly right. So what it's reading the header, right? It's reading the authorization header there from the request, right?
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Attaching it. It is doing some attaching, but that's on line 14, right?
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. In here, to rec.user. Okay. Yeah. It reads it from the header of the request.
We can see that in the network tab anyway. When you are sending requests, right? If you open Chrome.
Let's go to here.
Yeah, we need to look at the network tab. So bring up the network tab. Okay, so we have a few XHR requests here. You need to go to the headers section. And you need to look at the request headers and pay attention. There's an authorization key there, right? You see that? Authorization. So this is what this middleware is checking. So when it receives a request coming in, it will read that, value, bearer, blah, blah, blah. And if you pay attention, that value is just a JWT token.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And then it's using the JWT library to check whether the token is valid. So user has a valid session. Okay. So after checking it, it will return this parameter called user on the callback there on line 9. Yeah. So if it's valid, you will have the user object, and that user object is coming from the JWT. If you copy the JWT token that you see there, right? Onu alalım and let's put that
if you
into
check it in here,
bang. So that's the user object you see, payload. Okay. That's the user object, and from there onwards, you can use rec.user in your controller function
to access this object.
Yeah, if it's authenticated, right? If it's authenticated, you will have this extra parameter on the request.
Okay.
There's that.
So that's that. Where is it? So yeah. So when you put authentication in here, you will be able to access that rec.user in the controller we set. So if I go to controller, probably in here we didn't need that, but yeah, let's see. Delete session by ID maybe. Okay, in here we meant to use it, we didn't. This is
get session by ID, get user sessions. I don't know. I'm sure we are using it somewhere.
there it is. There you go. So in here, what we've done is we have read user ID parameter inside the rec.user object.
If
so
you go back to JDAO,
this,
I know.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's reading that.
It's reading this here.
And you can only read rec.user if it's authenticated. Okay, if you pass through the authentication middleware and it succeeds. Okay, that's something you need to pay attention to.
Okay, that's it. So if you would like to use rec.user, if your endpoint requires to know who the user is, that's what you need to include. And of course the middleware, you need to import that. Okay, so that's one thing.
Any questions up this far?
I have a question. I wanted to ask it from the beginning. Why do we have to write all these requests in the root? Is it an obligation, or we can create any JS file and write in them inside there?
In like this root.js thing?
Yes, I mean, do we need to have a route.js file, or we can write in any kind of JS file and call them?
You need to
I
use
think
this
it's the
one.
convention.
Yeah, this is the convention. So when you have an event point, just edit here.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. But it could have been like a roots folder and an index.js in there, and it will still work. It doesn't need to have that exact key on the name.
It's possible to split them, but we don't. Makes it easier to manage this way. It's long. The file is really long, but it doesn't do anything. There is no logic at this stage. It's almost like just configuration.
Yeah.
It gives all your stuff. So where were we? Okay, so in here we said as a middleware we use authentication, and in here you can see another function called authorize and calls the roles admin. So that means if the user type is admin, the user will have access to this endpoint.
So when we authorize the user roles, should we need to define the user roles somewhere, or we can just type whatever we like here?
Admin is coming from a constant, I think.
Yeah, admin is basically like this sort of file where we said admin is admin. So basically like string as it is defined in our database. If I go to users here, you see like admin free tier. So
user types.
Yeah, it refers to those user types basically. This one. Okay. So user type admin. I said okay. So do we need to dig more into this?
The only thing that we need to mention is that it's an array. Just make if you go back to roots.js, you see the authorized middleware takes an object with the key roles, and roles is an array. Okay, so in this example we said anyone with the admin role, but if you wanted to do like admin, moderator, editor, blah blah blah, that is also possible. Okay,
like free tier, for example. I think there is that sort of enum in here. Constant user types. Okay, we only pulled out admin here because we only use that, but yeah, we could have pulled out free trial.
Type.
Yeah, and then
user.
Yeah, and then included in the array. To have multiple definitions. But yeah, so that's the second way or optimizing your endpoint according to your needs. And then one other bit, if we look at, let's say, maybe cutting tool, post cutting tool, yeah, we can look into this. So in here, we have used authentication only. We didn't need authorize admin because anybody should be able to post cutting tool because this is the whole point of the application anyway. But yeah, let's dive into the controller. What happened? Yes. So because this input, if I look into my table, cutting tools, it posts a new entry to the cutting tool, right? And then in the here, you can see there's a field called user ID. Where am I going to read that user ID? Of course, the header, request header,
Yeah.
right? That's why I pulled the user ID from rec.user. The rest of the stuff, rest of the input elements. So if nobody has, if there's anybody who didn't see productive machines, I can show them quickly where this is located. So this is like add new tool section in here. So you see like there are multiple inputs where we need to make sure it's valid. For example, if I, let's say, you see like if it's empty, it gives me that it's a required field, blah, blah, that sort of validation. So all of these fields are coming from the body of the request header. And then we do like a try and catch block before sending all of this input into our validation tool schema. So schemas are like templates. They define what you are expecting and what you are not expecting from a field, basically. In this case, we got multiple different types. You see all of these. Some of them are going to be file upload. Some of them are going to be numbers. Some of them are text. So we need to make sure that they are coming correctly before we write them into our database. So this is where we write our database into our database. So before that, we need to do the check. And this check has been done by creating a schema .validate. So we use a library called yup for validation. So if you write yup validation, it's going to bring you to this jquenza/yup. This is their open source GitHub. And there is loads of great documentation here, the API reference. You can see what everything does. For example, if I search validate, it's probably loads of validate stuff, yeah. But yeah, validate, and then you give it an object. Okay, so what we've done, we said validate, and our object is here. Okay, so let's see what this schema does, how it's been configured. So in every controller here, you can open a new folder called schemas and enter your schema logic in there. Right? If I look at post cutting tool, so everything here is related with that input form. As usual, you just require yup, and then of course there are some constants that we have used, like that admin thing, because there are some names in our database which we want them to be same across the whole platform. We don't need like some of them being capital, some of them lowercase. So because of that, we just define
Consistent,
these.
yeah.
Consistent. You see, like URL. If I say URL, that means URL, which is what I want. And then I can use it across everywhere. Here we are. Okay, so a typical yup schema. The greatest thing about yup is basically you can chain loads of different functions on it, like with the dot operator, as you can see. Let's take an example as operation name. So operation name is a field coming from here. It's going to come from here. What I said, I said dot string. So that means that I'm expecting a value operation name, and I want it to be a string. I want it to be required. The label, if there are any sort of error cases about this particular field, I want it to show as operation name, and the type error. So if anything goes wrong, it will give you that type error. So I can see that I've done a mistake here. So it should say text. I can alter these type errors, what I'm going to see. Similarly, this is also a string, everything is same.
Yeah, maybe just to mention, bare minimum, a field should have at least the type. So like yup string, yup number, yup blah blah blah. There are a few others. Then you need the label and type error. These three are mandatory. Okay.
This
So
and
the require is not an
Required is
obligation.
optional because sometimes a field might be null in the database. That's okay. But
Yeah.
sometimes you need to make it required.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's about the dots.
Mm-hmm.
So the dot, it's a like a part of yup, or it's a common thing we can see in JS.
Yup library is used this way. So it's using a particular programming pattern. So you can chain everything, right? So you go yup string, okay? And that tells, okay, that field needs to be a string. And from there onwards, you can keep chaining other yup methods like required or type error. You see what I mean? You're chaining.
Yeah, I got it.
Mm-hmm. And in the documentation, you can see most of them anyway. Yeah, you see, like it says string.required. Likewise, you could define min, max, number, and that sort of stuff.
With numbers, you can do min, max, positive, negative. You can do dates. You can do booleans.
Integer.
Yeah. Obviously, there are complex types like arrays and objects.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like yup.mix something. It goes like that, or you include yup and then chain everything.
Yep.
So what it does is basically every time a request comes in, before you actually write it in your database, in here, you do a check. Basically, you do a validation check with your schema, looking at your schema. I would like to look at.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah,
why this is in a try catch? This is very important. Why this is in a try catch? So each controller which uses yup validation needs to be laid out like this, exactly like this. You have a try, and the first thing you do after the try is checking your schema. Okay, and what happens behind the scenes, this yup schema is going to get validated, and if it's incorrect, it's going to throw an error.
So it's going to go to that catch block and just say
straight
error.
away.
Yeah. Okay. It will not do this bit. So usually we do not have that block. If you're not going to validate anything, this is what you get. So you get like a create cutting tool function, which is basically like an SQL query, takes all this data and writes them in SQL. And if it fails, it gives you catch. But because we would like to check in advance, in the same try block, with this, we place our validation logic before. It's just here.
So if it fails, it goes into the catch block. It doesn't do any database operation. That's important. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Because if the form is not valid, we don't want to write it into the database, basically.
Yeah, we want to tell the user, sorry, there's some problem with your data. Go fix it and come back.
And yeah, in the schema, we can basically assign the exact error messages that we would like to provide to the user. Okay, that's good. Great. Just another one in here, which is a little bit more complex. I would like to have a look into that as well. So if I go to sessions, again, another post session. So usually this sort of UP validation you need in the post endpoints, because you are expecting to write something in your database and you would like to check if it's valid. If it's a get, you don't really need a UP most of the times, because you're not basically writing anything or checking anything, you're just getting data, right? You don't need to validate the type of the input if you are only getting the input, getting an output. So yeah, so this is post user session. So this is a little bit complex. So we got, as you can see, we got the similar sort of vibe. We have included our user because we need user ID to be written in our database somehow. And then we have read all of these values from the body. This is still fine. And then before we send our create request, we have done a validation again on those values, right? So this is a form. Just a quick reminder for the ones who are not familiar with the project. So if I go to my dashboard, so there are 3 types of inputs in this project, guys. So 3 types of forms. Most of the form inputs are same. So if I choose cat to G code, it gives me that form. If I go come to G code, again, it gives the same form. However, some of the fields are not required. So some of them are going to be validated differently. So how we have managed this, right? So we have written 3 validation templates in here, as you can see, for cat to G code validation, come to G code validation, G code to G code validation. So they're pretty much the same with subtle differences. For example, if you see here, I have defined a UP object, and in the object I have said there's the shape of the object needs to have height, width, length, and shape. And then this object individually, you know, I can nest stuff, will be number and nullable. Whereas if I go to come to G code template, as you can see, these values here are not nullable, they are required. You see this sort of differences. Again, in here, there are some other stuff. But yeah, the main logic is how we manage this. We have written 3 templates, and then we have got a pivot function here, where it basically defines what the schema is going to be. So if initially we have defined schema to be come to G code schema template, taking from that template up here. And then we said, look at the session type. If it's cat to G code, use this schema. If it's come to G code, use this schema. If it's G code to G code, use this schema. And then this schema provider function basically is injected in our controller. So rather than calling one schema, what I've done, I have called that provider, gave it like a session type input from there. I read it from rec.body and run this session provider function with that type. So those types could be any of the before, actually any of these, right? So depending on that type, this schema takes it, schema provider takes it, and then decides which one to run, which one of those templates to run.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In here, in the post session, we have a schema per, if I can say, a default schema, which is a come to G code. Then we say if the session is cut to G code, the schema become equals. So what's happened here, I don't understand, is come to G code become equals to cut to G code or something like that? Because we define it as schema in the beginning.
Yeah, we define it with let. We created this constant, right? So if you ignore these, what would happen here? What's the output here? The output the output here is schema is cut to G code, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I added those extra bits, if it thinks that the schema is this should be that, it rewrites this on.
Okay.
You see?
Yeah. I mean, you can also think it this way. On line 9, we could have done return cut to G code.
Because I was
Yeah.
thinking like
so
come to
we'll
G
let
code. Yeah, I think I got it.
Yeah. So if we
Yeah.
didn't have that, we could have do like an early exit in these ones, but because we wanted to have something, you know, as a default,
Yeah. Nice.
that's how we handled it. Okay. So this is how the validation is done in the backend of our code base. And I don't want to go too much into detail in these templates, you know.
Yeah,
there
I
are
think
some,
that's not the point. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some complex bits in here. But another good thing to mention, you can write custom tests on your UP schemas, right? So, for example, in this method, for cutting tool IDs, we got like an array. We are expecting an array. I said there's going to be minimum 1 entry in that array, required, blah, blah. And then I've put a test block in here, in those brackets, and written my own custom test. And in this test, what happens is basically I'm checking if the cutting tool ID's session number is null or not. Session ID is null or not. So, for example, if I look at cutting tools table, you see some of them has got user session ID, but some of them are not. I would like to check if the user cutting tool ID that I will give in the array will be null or not. To do that, I need to write a separate query. As you can see, the function takes cutting tool IDs in the test parameter and then returns basically a query, performs a query. If I look at the query, which is in the same folder, again, queries folder under the schemas of that specific endpoint, because this is only related with that specific endpoint. If I go here, as you can see, it's just like a basic SQL query. So it says select cutting tool ID from cutting tools, right? We know what it's going to do, where user ID is null, right? And also, because it's an array, we have used this reduce SQL thing so that it applies it everything in the array. So if you say you got like 8, 9, 10, 20, it will apply. It will look if any of these has got null and return you the ID, basically, at the end of the day.
Isn't there a simpler example, like a delete one or something, or get session by ID? I don't know.
Yeah, let's have a look.
Delete session. No check on this one.
No check on this one.
This one maybe. Yeah.
Do we have a custom test? Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, this one is much simpler.
Yeah, select user session, and yeah, we have done 2 checks in this one basically.
But ignore the admin check. Let's ignore the admin check for now. Yeah, on the washware.
Let's look at that. So session ID, what it says, does session belong to user? Okay. So I am a user. I created a session, right? This one of these, and I would like to view it. So if I am the user, if I am the creator of this session, I can see this. Nobody else, right? I can't see any, forms that has been filled by some other users. I need that session to belong to me. That's why we are checking it here. So the session ID came in as usual. We said it's going to be a number. It's a required number. It's going to be positive. It's going to be an integer. The label is this. If anything goes wrong about these types I've provided, it's gonna give you this error. That's fair. And then let's do this check. Does session belong to user? If it doesn't, it will give you this error. Session must exist and belong to user. The function side of things, as you can see, so we are ignoring that section at the moment.
Just delete it for now, yeah.
Yeah. I have read this user ID from this.parent, where parent is basically our parent there.
The schema is the parent.
Yeah, the whole this thing, the whole schema is the parent of the test block.
Parent is the, if you go one layer up, go to the index.js, that one. Okay. So here, parent is the object you see on line 11. Okay.
The one that is,
yeah, so it's trying to do this.parent.user ID, this.parent.session ID. Okay. So within your test block, within your test function, you can read other properties as well if you want.
That's perfect. Yeah. Okay, so this session, we are worried if the session belongs to the specific user. So what do? We make another query specific to that schema. So get session ID schemas. You got a queries in there, and select user session query is there. So we are calling this query, and in this query, it's like a really simple query again. Just what it does, selects user ID from user sessions, where user ID and user session ID this. So it basically, if I run this on my workbench, so I've got like this user sections table, right? Everything is there. If I run this query, the user ID, let's say 1. If the user ID is 1 and the user session ID is 1, it will give me that session. So I know now that the session number 1 belongs to user number 1.
Let's try user ID 2 and session 1.
Okay, let's say user ID 2. So if another user with the user ID 2 comes in and tries to access that session with number 1 ID, you see no results. Query is executed, but no results. If there is no results within this query, what's gonna happen in here? If session doesn't exist, so if this is null, basically, what's gonna happen? It's basically gonna return false, right? It's gonna return false. If it's so, that means when the test returns false, it means that the test failed. So I will see this error, right?
Yep.
If this is true, then the test passes. Everything is good. User will see no error.
Okay.
And the controller will run basically.
All right. One question. So the way you write I think the test label, like session must belong to user. How does it know that this is for the false, this is for the true?
This is for the what? Sorry.
I mean, we have does session belong to user and session must exist and belong to user. But here we just saw that it returned false. How does it know when it returns false? It has to take that label.
Okay, so when it's false, it just gives you that message on line 22.
That's my question. How does it know that is the message it has to use?
It's the yup, right? It's the yup test. So yup.test. If you Google that yup.test, it's gonna give you some yup.test. Maybe something like this. It will show you.
Just look for .test.
Yeah. Yeah. So in here.
Yeah, that's the function that we use.
That's the function. So you give it like the name, the message, and the function. So if this function fails, it's gonna display this message.
Okay, I got it.
So what we got a string, the name of the test. So our test is named as does user belong to session, vice versa, whatever. And then the message is the second parameter, that, and the function is here. So if this function is false, that message is going to be displayed.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So it is Yoop basically. The Yoop framework does this for you. Okay, that's cool.
I think that's great. I think probably a question to ask is: everybody clear why you might need this? Because we said there are like this, maybe to summarize, we said there are a few ways of validating, right? There's the authorization middleware, right? And we said, we have authentication middleware. Then we have the authorized middleware.
Yeah.
And then we have Yoop schemas, and we have the Yoop test methods, right? So, okay. So, does everyone see why you might need the fourth one, the last one we show?
.test one.
Yeah.
I don't know if I got it. I don't know if it's the right answer, but is it because we try and catch or something like that? Like we need to check before validating or something like that? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay, so
for me, compared to the middleware one, the Yoop it's easy to write, but I don't know the reason why you guys choose that. To be honest.
I mean, the main reason for that is basically if you would like to write some custom tests depending on your business logic, right? So in our case, in this specific case, each user will be able to post a session. So these are sessions that the user has passed. So if I am an admin, for example, I will be able to see all of the sessions that has been created by every single user. But if I am only a user, only like a free tier user or a paid tier user, whatever, I would like to see only my own sessions. So in that custom test, I check if this session belongs to me. Yeah. So how do I do that? I send a custom query to my custom database. That's why I need to write a custom test. You will not do this out of the box. Yeah, so that's why. Hope it makes sense.
So it's like the last part you explained us to check if you're a user or admin. So is it only you can? I mean, that test it's only from you, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's only from you. Yeah. So where was it? So get session by ID. So that was it, right? Yeah. If I'm looking at a session and I would like to see the details of a session, I can only see mine. That's why I'm just checking if that session is mine or not. If that session belongs to that specific user or not, really. Yeah, I think if you guys start, doing a couple of them. So in Payful, I think we haven't touched the authentication. So the next task is going to be Payful authentication stuff. So we will need to write these things in there, most of them.
I provided a little summary on the chat as well.
You got a little summary on the chat. That's great. Yeah, we got this.
You can put that on the wiki.
Yeah, we can add this into wiki. Right, so this is how we can make a secure API, basically, how we can secure our API. For front end, things are not too different either, to be fair. It's almost the same. The best thing about Yoop, another best thing about Yoop is basically you can apply the same schema to backend and front end. So I will open the front end library now, front end code base now. Okay. So the cutting tools example, for example, in here, some of you guys got involved in writing these. So you know this is like a typical React. We are basically posting some stuff in here. Handle model fetching tools. We are posting stuff. That's why we need to give the users like reactive response. Like as soon as something goes wrong, before they click on save, we would like to hit them with an error message. Because API, as you know, wouldn't give us a response unless we do a request, right? Because it's a request response relation there. If I press save and send a request here, you know, it's gonna come back with a response. All of these.
Yeah.
But in the front end, what I want to do is, as soon as this field goes wrong, it to give us the error message. So this comes from front end. You know that instantaneous response comes from front end.
No API call has been made yet.
Yeah, no API call.
No API calls.
Yeah. However, if I wanted to, like, let's say, write everything and send.
You can only make the API call if you have a valid form.
Valid form.
Yeah. So if this form is not valid and I send, you see, it doesn't do any calls. It doesn't say anything in the network tab. So I do that. You see, nothing. But if I fill in everything, make sure all of these error messages are cleared now, and click on submit. Yes, it did send, although it gave me 400 for some reason at the moment. But yeah,
Preview.
I think that has gone.
Because of the types.
Yeah.
You see it, that message, material dimensions.height.
Yep.
So this is coming from API, that the previous Yoop validation that we were looking at. So that's where we are having the error at the moment. So this is, you know, how we can display it. Anyway, anything to add, Marcel, here?
Well, you didn't show how the schema works on the front end.
Yeah, so I'm moving on to that now. So we got our input form. You know,
Maybe just mention that we have a custom form as well.
Yeah. So we have built some custom form components in, I think, was it in components. Where is it? There it is. So in here we got forms, and we built those elements, which are like an element for checkbox, an element for form, a bit like the component library that you guys are working on at the moment, but this is using React hook forms. This one behind the scenes.
Yeah. Anyway, you don't need to know the implementation details, but you need to know how to use it, if that makes sense. Okay, so maybe just show them the usage.
Yeah, the usage is quite straightforward, really, in this one. So if I go back to my cutting tool format, so what you will do is you will import your components from this, whichever ones you want to use. You wrap your form with form tags. and then you give it 3 parameters. One of them is the initial values of the form. This can sometimes be empty if you want your form to be empty. And then the validation schema, so which schema to use. It's the same thing, as we've seen before, but yeah, you just put it here quite nicely. Of course, you need to import it from the schemas folder in the same folder again, like, exactly the same as API. And then on submit, what function to call. So it's going to call handle at tool in here. So this one. Right. So it automatically, this form component automatically applies the schema initially. And then if the schema is okay, it pursues with the handle at tool query. Right. This is automatically done for you. And in all of those inputs, you can see a name field. So this name field, so previously for each name field, we used to use state hook. We used to create a state for these fields, right? And then read the state for most recent input. But with our new component, input component, you can just declare name and it automatically creates the state and all those state managements behind the scenes for you. So if I go to definition, you will see it just takes a name and then creates and registers it. And then when it says register, behind the scene, React Hook Forms creates a state for this input with that specific name you provided, and it manages it from there.
By the way, I found the issue with the nested ones schema.
Did you?
Yeah, line 7.
Nice.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
That name thing there. Anyway.
Okay, we can look into this.
Fix me to do. You just add a to do command.
Okay. Cool. Anyway, where were we? We are here. Components, tools. Yes. Okay. So, yeah. So everybody's clear in terms of this name and how we are going to be writing the reports as the forms with using this form and name fields.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite simple.
It's quite straightforward. As long as you get the name right and it matches the keys on your schema, that's all we need to do.
Yep.
Yep, sounds good.
I
think Ahmed got disconnected though.
Yeah, it is recording, so he can catch up. What was I going to say? Schema. Just show them the schema as well on the front end. So this schema is exactly the same as you have on the API side. Only difference is that you need to delete the test functions. Okay. Because obviously test functions were used to make database queries. We can't do that on the front end, so we don't do that. We just gather all the data structure, and that's it. You delete the test, copy paste, you're done.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, one thing in here you might have seen another test block, but this is nothing to do with the API test. So this is another test that we are doing on the front end only. Right. This as you can see in this test block, we still got the same arrangement, but then on the function we are not doing any calls to API. No API calls.
Okay. By the way, Kemal, can you send us .env file, please?
Yeah.
It's not in the secrets.
Yeah, put it on secrets maybe, but that's the front end.
That's the front end. Oh, you need the back end, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Cool. other thing to add here. Once the error message gets displayed, sorry, this is backhand. Yeah. So once this schema throws an error, you got an error this schema, how our front end will know where to display that error. We have made an error message component, basically, and you can call it by the name.
Same name is the input.
Yeah, exactly. The UP schema is the same name, input is the same name, error message is the same name, and all of them are using those states made in the back for us with the React hook forms. So as long as all of these names are matching, that means that you are good.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, of course.
So the error message, it's a component we create, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if we go to there, so it basically uses form context, and if there are any errors, it just gives you that field error message, which is coming from UP.
Yeah.
Really. So, and the color red, of course.
We need the same fix on line 6 here.
Nice. Bug fixing as we go. Okay.
Anyway, I think that's it,
That's it, really, yeah. That is important, and the names are important.
Okay, thank you, guys.
That's all, really, yeah. Any other questions you guys have?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
I
That's
think
great.
I got the idea.
Yeah, you got the idea at least.
Yeah.
I don't expect you guys to, get out of here and start writing UP schemas straightforward. But yeah, we are going to do some examples together in the following days in the painful database. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. I think, yeah.